But we can use the microphone.
I'd like to thank you for coming to tonight's evening. It's an education that whole purpose here is designed to educate them on our name change process and to allow us to input and to input from those of us who are members of Jefferson School. The facilitator for this event is one Carol Johnson. She is from Equity Consulting Group. It was designed so that there would be three presentations in the beginning. A presentation on Sequoia, very brief, to discuss the alternate name. We have not spent a lot of time talking about Sequoia. Each other presentation, for those who want to change the name Jefferson and those who want to change the name Jefferson, have been allotted 15 minutes to do their presentation. The speakers on the panel this evening are Miriam Abram, Marguerite Talahughes, and Patricia Smith. They will be discussing changing the name of our school. In the center here, I have Robin Einhorn. She's a professor from UC Berkeley, and she will do a historical presentation on Jefferson. Speaking to the name Sequoia is Robin Sharman.
I'm Carol Johnson, as Betty said, and I really am honored to be here this evening. I live in Berkeley, and I'm familiar with the way things work here, and in a respect that I'm saying, lighthearted way, but also in an honorable way. I'm honored to be able to facilitate this process and help you to think about a possible name change as it is, and have that dialogue. And I was saying to Robin earlier, talking about this is the micro of the macro discussion that's going on in the country. So it's a wonderful opportunity to bring you all together as a school community. And that's really how I look at this and how I designed this evening, so that there will be as much discussion as possible in a chance, I'll give you 2 minutes total. Okay. What did you think of that? What did you feel about it? Blah, blah, blah. Whatever you need to say doesn't have to be said. All of your feelings don't have to be said with this microphone. So the idea is to clear your thinking before you do take the microphone a little later. Okay? Reaction time. Will happen after those. And then there will be some small group discussions, and I'll ask you to go into small groups of 6 to 8 people and have some discussion about what you think the name should be and why. And again, I'll ask you to balance the airtime so that every voice is included, so you're listening as well as talking. Small group discussions will come then to the open forum where we'll have people come up and you'll have 2 minutes maximum each. And I have been very strict about time. I have a timer. I stop people after what they're saying. So I'll be monitoring that and people can come up and make comments. I will remind you at that time that if you've heard the same comment 4 times over, do you need to say it again in a little bit different way? Is that about ego or is that about the comment? So that's going to be my monitoring position up here, okay? Any questions about the agenda? Are we ready to go? Okay, good. So the first thing I'm going to do is ask Bob. You're going to have 5 minutes, Bob.
You want me to use the microphone? Okay, we will start. Okay, it works. All right, I'm providing basic information about the name sequoia. There are 2 types of sequoia trees. One of them is Sequoiadendron gigantea, which is giant sequoia, which are the big trees that you find up in the Sierra. Those are not the sequoia that we're talking about. We are talking about the other type of sequoia, that is Sequoia sempervirens. It is native to Berkeley and much of the California coast. It's also known as the coast redwood. There are 7 of them out here on our playground, those nice tall trees. In fact, the Sequoia sempervirens grow to be the tallest trees in the world. As tall or taller than a football field is long, as tall as 50 people piled up on top of each other's heads. So very, very tall trees, the tallest in the world. In fact, they are so tall that there were 3 huge, tall sequoia trees that the early European explorers used. That they were up on the top of the hills here, and the European explorers could see them from the sea, and they used them to navigate themselves in through the Golden Gate. So there's a long history of sequoia trees in Berkeley. Then they covered the area. Any place you see eucalyptus now, there's a good chance that there were a lot of sequoias there, and that they were quite tall. The other amazing thing about sequoias is how long they live. You can go visit an old-growth sequoia tree here in California, and that very same tree was there, living and growing and more than 100 feet tall at the time of Jesus Christ. There are not many trees, not many living things in the world that you can say that about. So the last thing I wanted to mention about sequoia trees is that some people say that the name sequoia came from Chief Sequoia, who was a Cherokee who invented the Cherokee language. It's possible that that's where the name came from, but it's just as likely that the name came from a Latin root meaning to follow, and the botanist who gave the name gave no indication about which was his reason for providing that name for the tree. The word to follow makes sense because of because it's the last in the evolutionary line of trees, and that it may have meant that. So that's the basic information about the sequoia that we are talking about with the proposed name, which, by the way, happened to be suggested by my daughter, Kirby.
Hi. I wish wish I had something like a tree to talk about, but mine is a little less pleasant. Like most of us here tonight, as a school child, I was introduced to Thomas Jefferson as the writer of the Declaration of Independence, as the premier icon of American liberty. Like most of us here tonight, when I later learned that even as he declared the self-evident right of liberty for himself, he held other human beings in bondage, I felt surprised, uncomfortable, and betrayed by the obvious contradiction. In order to calm our feelings of discomfort and maintain Jefferson as that premier icon of American liberty, many popular historians have attempted to explain to us that Jefferson was a complex man who hated slavery and worked to end it, even as he owned and exploited enslaved people. But more thorough historians have found very little in Jefferson's words and nothing in his actions to support this as a reality. One popular misconception is that Jefferson tried to limit the expansion of slavery into the new territories created by the Louisiana Purchase. This is not true. If we read from the Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Negro President, Jefferson and the Slave Power by Gary Will, and I have this up here on the overhead so you can read along if you can see it. When the issue of slavery in the new territory is raised by modern historians, it is normally to say that Congress accepted Jefferson's plan to exclude foreign slave trade from the area. This looks enlightened now, but in fact the South had long been trying to block that since it drove down prices on the surplus blacks already in the country. They wanted exclusive selling rights in Louisiana. Louisiana looked like a bonanza for people anxious to unload their slaves at a high price, and it looked that way precisely because Jefferson excluded slave importations from abroad. If we read from Slavery and the Founders by Paul Finkelman, we discover that during the debates over the Missouri Compromise, Jefferson argued against prohibiting slavery in the West. Apologists for Jefferson will caution you not to judge him by present-day ethical standards, and to understand that he was actually a liberal thinker for his time and place. That is simply not true. John Adams never owned slaves. Benjamin Franklin freed the few enslaved people he owned during his lifetime and then became the first president of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. George Washington refused to either buy or sell humans during his lifetime, and in his will left each previously enslaved person their freedom and means of self-support. Jefferson's friend and neighbor, Edward Cole, traveled to Illinois in order to free and give 40 acres of land to each of the people he had previously enslaved. Robert Carter of Virginia chose to free over 500 people he had previously enslaved and made arrangements for their self-support. On my next overhead, these statistics show us the growth of the free population of African Americans in Virginia after the Revolution. In 1782, Virginia adopted a law allowing voluntary manumission of slaves by their owners. In the 8 years after that passed, the free population of blacks in Virginia grew from 2,000 to 12,766, almost 11,000. That cannot be accounted for by the birth rate. That's accounted for by Virginia slave owners freeing their slaves. In the next 10 years, there was a growth again of 7,358. That's in the red or orange, I'm not sure how it's called. And then in the following 10-year period, another growth of 10,446. Thomas Jefferson died July 4th, 1826, having freed only 5 of at least 200 enslaved persons he owned. The 5 people that he did free were all members of his family. Looking at these statistics, it becomes clear that no small number of men and women in Jefferson's time, place, and situation were able and willing to make good on the tenets of the Declaration of Independence. Apologists for Jefferson will want you to know that he was a good slave owner. It is hard for me to understand what a good slave owner might be, but we can look at this letter from Thomas Jefferson as evidence of how slaves were managed by Jefferson. This is a letter from Jefferson's farm book, a letter from Jefferson to a Reuben Perry, April 16, 1812. Having received information in March that James Hubbard had been living in Lexington upwards of 12 months, I engaged a man to go after him, offering a premium of $25 in addition to yours. He took him and brought him here in irons. I had him severely flogged in the presence of his old companions and committed to jail. All circumstances convince me he will never again serve any man as a slave. The moment he is out of jail and his irons are off, he will be off. It will be best for you to sell him. Jefferson had this man publicly, severely beaten for what crime? Seeking his own self-evident right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jefferson was willing and able to do what all slaveholders do as a course of their business: extract forced labor from men, women, and children under the threat of unlimited physical violence. This is the business Jefferson was actively engaged in his entire adult life. He justified what he knew was inhumane treatment on the basis of racial inferiority. For as well as authoring the phrase, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal," he also authored one of this country's earliest and most widely read pseudo-scientific justifications for racism. Comparing them by their faculties, memory, reason, and imagination, it appears to me that in memory they are equal to whites, in reason much inferior, as I think one could scarcely be found capable of tracing and comprehending the investigations of Euclid, and in imagination they are dull, tasteless, and anomalous. I don't have time to read this all. He talks about African Americans' disagreeable odor. Their griefs are transient. When we teach children about Jefferson, when we read these words to African American children, if we don't, we're not telling them the truth. If we do, how do we look into their faces and tell them this is a man to admire? I ask you, how do you look into my brown face and tell me this is a man for me to admire and respect? Is it fair to judge a man or woman by only their mistakes? No. This is not a mistake.
It's working.
It's not fair to judge any man or woman.
Margarita, it's working. Please try to use that. Just
I did. Oh. Is it fair to judge any man or woman's life only by their mistakes? Of course not. But owning slaves was not a mistake Jefferson made. It was a choice. Jefferson's writings make it clear that he gave racism and slavery a great deal of thought. It is clear that he was aware of the thoughts, arguments, and actions of the leading abolitionists of his day. Many of them were his friends and neighbors. His choice was to continue to enjoy and expand a lavish lifestyle based upon the exploitation of enslaved African Americans. There never has been a just reason or excuse for enslaving other human beings, most certainly not the color of their skin. Continuing to celebrate Thomas Jefferson with the name of our school makes a statement that perhaps there is some understandable or excusable reason for his willful and deliberate dehumanization of over 200 African American individuals. This is in direct contradiction of everything else we teach our students about justice, equality, humanity, and personal responsibility.
Hi, good evening. I'm Miriam Abrams, and I'm a parent of a third grader here at our school. And let me begin by saying that I do not want our school named after someone who enslaved the ancestors of some of the parents, teachers, staff, and students at our school. It's offensive to me, and I know it's certainly offensive to so many members of the African American community at our school. When my family came to our country after World War I from Europe, escaping anti-Semitism and economic hardship, although it certainly is not a perfect country here, it was the country of their dreams. And I know many of us in this room have a similar story. But for the African Americans in our community and in our country, this country is a country of their nightmares. Forcibly stolen from their country, living in subhuman conditions, families torn apart, women raped. Their story is one of misery that is considered a crime against humanity and was considered a crime against humanity in many parts of the world and also in parts of the U.S. during Jefferson's time. Because we're a diverse community, we have different stories and different perspectives. They're as different and as large as dreams and nightmares. This difference comes up when we consider Thomas Jefferson. Is it more important that he wrote the Declaration of Independence, which inspired my family? Or is it more important that he wrote Notes from Virginia that provided a rationale for slavery and racism that continues today? Which of those rings louder in our ears depends on our perspective and our stories. But we are one community, and so we need to reconcile those differences. To me, what it boils down to is this: the commemoration of my family's dreams, of which Jefferson is an icon, is not more important than acknowledging the African American family's nightmares. It's been a journey for me to arrive at this place. In the beginning, actually, I supported the name change mostly to support the African American parents and teachers in our community, and especially the people who started the name change process. But as I started working on the name change, I began to discover more information. One piece of that was the experience I had when I was collecting signatures for the petition. It was a marked contrast. African American families, I did not even have the words come out of my mouth when they were signing the petition. Very different from other families in our community who some supported it, some didn't, but we all needed a rationalization. And I started to think, what am I not getting here when I see the stark contrast in the difference of reactions? And so I started learning more about it, some of the things that we've already heard tonight. And I started to realize that I want the name changed not only to support African Americans in our community, but I personally do not want our school named after someone who enslaved other human beings, who wrote the words that we just heard. So let me just finish by saying we have an opportunity as a community to stand against racism. Changing the name of the school will not end racism, but when we listen to each other, when we really honor each other's experiences, we can make a difference. We can be the compassionate, courageous heroes that we wish Jefferson was. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Patricia Smith, and I'm a parent of a third grader. I do support the name change. I do not support Jefferson as the name of the school. I know that slavery was a brutal and inhumane system that gave rise to many injustices in this country, some of which exist to this day. It created horrible stereotypes, lynchings, Jim Crow laws, and many of those things were changed or rectified by the creation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I believe that Jefferson could have done quite a bit to rectify the horrible existence of the slaves that he owned. He could have either paid them, freed them, or even included them in the Declaration of Independence. Very few of us would actually voluntarily submit to forced servitude. But that's exactly what happened with people of color, black people. And I don't think that this was, and I believe that he could have done quite a bit to rectify the situation, and he didn't. I do think that when you look at his legacy, I do not think that any of his accomplishments overrides the legacy of slavery. Thank you.
Okay, is that on? Reaction time, my friends. Turn to somebody next to you, just one person though, and react. You might say, well, what is that? Well, what's in your gut? How do you feel? Get in touch with how you feel right this minute. 2 minutes total, so quickly do it.
my point, hiding Jefferson is small. So I hear what you're saying. I disagree with little parts, but most of it's true. I understand the truth of it. I think his legacy is much larger than his sin. Where do you come from? Because I've never heard you speak of it.
If as a teacher, you're required to give the whole picture, the whole story. How could you?
Maybe it's a little brighter and clearer. Hello, welcome back. We're going to have another presentation now from Robin, who's going to be speaking about Thomas Jefferson, and I'll turn it over to her.
Hi. Well, thank you for inviting me. This is very, very interesting, and these were so great. There's a little bit of false advertising on the agenda here because I'm really not here as a partisan. For any name, when I first heard that this discussion was happening, first of all, as a historian, nothing is better than to have people in the community actually discussing this stuff. So it's so great that you're doing it, and it's so great for me to hear it. But I'm not here to defend Jefferson. I'm here as an emissary from Cal to tell you that you could not have found anyone. And sorry, I was screaming at an A's game last night, so my voice is not what it could be, but you couldn't have found anybody to walk in here and make the arguments that Marguerite so eloquently demolished. And that's because there's been a real transformation in the way historians look at this period of American history, a really comprehensive transformation, in which slavery is at the very center. At the time of the Revolution, 20% of Americans were enslaved. That's a lot. In Jefferson's Virginia, 40% of the population was enslaved. So these are very, very high numbers, and much of American history is being reinterpreted in light of these facts. Now, late in his life, Jefferson, I have a story here that Marguerite left out. Late in his life, Thomas Jefferson decided what he wanted on his tombstone. And what he decided he wanted was that he was the author of the Declaration of Independence, the founder of the University of Virginia, and the author of the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, which disestablished the Anglican/Episcopalian Church. In other words, even on his tombstone, he didn't want anything suggesting opposition to slavery. Like, he didn't even think about it then. So it's really a problem. And the problem is when we try to use history for decorative purposes, for commemorative purposes, because history is much more complicated than that. But I want to do something that honors the putative reason I'm here. And that is to say that when people do defend Jefferson as a name for a school, here is what they have in mind. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it doesn't stop there. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Well, we'll just go with that one. Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. And that, of course, is what you all are doing, that last part, here tonight. As Americans, we believe that. I hope. Well, at least in Berkeley. As Americans, we believe that, and we want to celebrate that. And so the question becomes whether Jefferson is in fact shorthand for that to us. And that's a difficult question, and you've just heard a few reasons why Jefferson is not an appropriate shorthand for that sentiment. Does it dishonor that sentiment to get rid of the name? I personally don't think so. The Declaration of Independence was actually written by a committee. Although you got to give Jefferson credit as a prose stylist. He was really good. But to use Jefferson as shorthand well, I don't need to go into the problems you've just heard at length. I don't really have that much else to say, except just to say that, from the perspective of a professional historian, our view of U.S. history in this period now is that slavery was of the very essence of the American founding. That Jefferson was typical and was important. That Robert Carter and Edward Coles were not typical. That it is an accurate depiction of American history to stress Jefferson in all of the ways that Marguerite and the others have done. But to say that it is accurate is not to say that we necessarily want to celebrate it. Thanks for having me.
More reaction time, 2 minutes. This time, though, I want you to follow my instructions because there's something that comes afterwards. If you talked to 2 people last time, please don't do that again. Pick one person as your partner this time and do 2 minutes total time, reaction time. Okay, so you have one partner. Not 3, but 2. Just talk to one person. Move around if you have to. Come on.
I knew.
Yes, thank you.
My thing. I just
Did you find Would you mind I'd like you to put your attention back here again for a minute. Reaction time for this period is over. But it looks like it's happening. You should have one partner now, correct? Does everybody have, a couple of you have 3, snuck in 3, I know. What I'd like you to do now, and this is going to take us a few minutes, about 3 minutes, but we're going to go into small group discussions right now. And and the question that I want everybody to look at in the small group discussion is, what do you think the name should be and why? You might need more information, there's ideas, people are coming up to me with ideas. Take them to the small group and really have a good discussion for about 20 minutes. You're going to be in a small group. What I'd like, and then we're going to come back and have an open forum to synthesize some of the ideas that come out of the small group. Why are we doing a small group? So you have a chance to talk to a smaller group of people and give some of your thinking and listen to each other. That's why. And we have a limited time up here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is notice who your partner was and is right now in this little reaction time that you had. And I'd like you to find 2 other pairs, so there will be 6 people in a small group. But I'd like you to find 2 other pairs, not the way we usually do it. Oh, I know you, let's go off, I know what you're going to say. I'd like you, this is a community experience, so I'd like you, the 2 of you, to find 2 other pairs of people that you don't know very well. Okay, and that might be hard, but try to do that. And I'd like you to circle up in a little circle with your chairs and address this question, balance the airtime, and listen. Yes? No, which is correct. You're correct. Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
synthesize some ideas in a small group now. So really listen and talk to each other for about 20 minutes. Make sure every voice gets in.
long time.
Thank you.
What do you think the relations women, I say those things are morally wrong, regardless of the culture involved. While I can make that judgment of an entire practice, I personally hesitate to condemn or criticize one individual within a culture who practices those things. Moreover, it's easy for me to stand outside of that culture as a very educated Western woman and speak in condemnation of the deeds done within that culture, be it genital mutilation, etc. But it's very hard for someone inside that culture not only to actively resist its standards, but to formulate a reason for resisting them. That is to develop an understanding from within the culture of why its basic tenets and principles are wrong. Political change to cultures like those will not be affected by us from outside telling you why we think they're wrong. Political change is affected by people inside the cultures who, based on that culture's own system, find a moral way to rewrite the beliefs of that culture. That is the root of all real political and social change. Indigenous efforts at deep reconsideration of one's own culture. And that's a great recognition. I think it's both were children and actually one of them was allowed to escape, which meant that she her husband married and was on his own. You know what that means to raise not like today. Right here, a day ever fly.
Malcolm X used to be called late. Okay, it was changed. I don't know, a long time ago. I wasn't around here. And I know, so I went in there, parent of a kindergartner, and with some knowledge of the community, I live in South Berkeley, okay, and it doesn't mean a whole hell of a lot from the standpoint of contemporary society there in South Berkeley. It really does not make race relations easier, more cooperative, didn't change the balance of who was in the PTA, didn't seem to have to do much with how kindergartners were managed, differentials, and you know, all that achievement gap stuff. It was all the same as everywhere else. It didn't seem to alter the spirit of the community. You know, the difficult things seem very difficult. Okay. I teach in a community college. It's mostly students of color. You know, I do this stuff every day. It's very, difficult. And I live in a town that has renamed all kinds of things to go along with the ideals of civil rights movement. I'm all for it.
And just show me by raising your hands. How many people would say in your group that there was divergent thinking expressed? Raise your hand if there was. Wow, that's great. That is great. That's fantastic. I'm not kidding. That's really, really good. What is that? So? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Well, no, just divergent thinking about the issues. Everybody wasn't in total agreement on everything. Right? Okay. How many people learned something or got some new insight so far tonight? Okay, don't feel pressured to raise your hand. That's great. Okay. You're just a fantastic group. You're making me very happy and excited. What I'd like you to do now is take about 2 minutes before we report out, and I'd like you to go around your small group circle and make eye contact with each other and give one appreciation to each person. I mean it. I want you to think about some gift or contribution, or if it's just thank you for saying what you said. I want everybody to get that thank you in the small group circle. You know why? Because we are imbalanced in the way we give feedback. If somebody said something that was controversial or was hard for them to say, they deserve some thank you for that.
And for some people, it's hard to speak. For others of us, it's very easy for us to speak, but I want everybody to get a thank you. And I don't want it to be cursory. I just, we're giving each other gifts here, insights. So just take a few minutes, make sure, somebody take responsibility to make sure that everybody gets something, a thank you in the circle, okay, for your contribution. I'm going to give you about 4 minutes total, so move on it. Now is we're going to start the public forum part of this evening, and you can stay where you are because I'm going to ask speakers to come up here by me so they can see my little timer. Yeah, turn your chairs around. But I want you to stay in your group as much as possible. Don't leave your group. This is the way we're going to do this. I know from what you just told me that you've had many insights, ideas, there's been some interesting thinking, and a lot of things are started to churn around these topics. What I'd like to do is offer 2 minutes. We're going to get as many people who want to speak to come up, and I'm going to just start very roughly with one group, then another, then another, then another, and then we'll go back around. But it's not a report out, so if you're sitting there and you just really want to say something, that's fine. We'll go until 8:30, and we'll give you 2 minutes. I'm going to use the timer. Agreeable? Okay, and this is insights, observations, thinking. And I'm going to start with your principal, Betty Delaney.
Thank you. The first part of this presentation really was designed to, as a part of the committee process, to present some information about Sequoia. Bobby did a nice job, thank you very much. And then the people who wanted to work on keeping the name Jefferson, and people who wanted to change the name had an opportunity to design today's program. And so what you saw was a presentation designed from those aspects of the committee. What was good for me and what I appreciated and part of the design was for there to be divergent thinking and for listening. And as we went around and as I listened and I watched, irrespective of point of view, it was nice to hear people communicating. What I've communicated ever since this process began was at the end of this, whatever decision it is, I would like for our community to maintain relationships with one another and to hear one another. And I think this is a very good process in being able to do that.
That was only 1 minute, so now you get the idea. Okay, which group would like to start? Just because we're moving through groups, not because we're going in any particular report-out fashion. Do you all want somebody over here want to start? Anybody from this group want to speak? Hello? Anybody want to speak? Yes? No? We're in the bathroom. Okay. Out of the door. Okay.
Oh,
you
the
want to come up?
bathroom.
Heard reference to Jefferson about Jeffersonian democracy, Jefferson's legacy of libraries and education, and there's that award given that I see in the Chronicle every day called the Jefferson Award, and I don't know why this man is associated with these ideas, but one of the reasons I came here was to hear that part too, and I didn't hear that. And I don't feel like I just feel like I need to hear that, to process that with all the other stuff, horrible stuff. And I'm glad I heard that, because I needed to be educated about that too. But I really wanted to hear that other part because it has formed the basis of our society here in the United States, and I didn't, so I'm disappointed. And if somebody knows about this or can suggest some books I can read next week, quickly, you know. We're not going to do clapping. I haven't you know, there's deserve it, but no clapping for the ends. You can all clap for me. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Who wants to go next? How about somebody from this group? Okay, well, I'm going to come back to this group. Okay, let me move around and come back. Is that all right? Is this another group here? Anybody from this group want to talk? Are you in this group? No, I'm in this group. Okay, well, anybody from this group want to talk? Okay.
Are we supposed to be reporting to the big group? No.
No, you can do that if you want.
Okay. Well, something that came up in our group and has come up repeatedly in discussions that I've had over the past year or so is that people wish there had been some kind of forum like this when the name change issue first came up, and regrets that that didn't happen, and feelings that maybe both the outcome of the vote and the feelings about whatever the decision is would have been different if we had more of an exchange of ideas over a longer period of time.
Is that how you feel? Yes. All right, that's okay, good job. Anybody else in another group now? Over this way, over this way? Okay, here. Excuse me.
Yeah, of course.
Say your name too.
Hello, my name is, I think I'm too close.
Yeah.
My name is Kevin Atkinson, and I'm a parent of a fifth grader here. A couple of things that I shared with the group that I think that everybody should know is, well, the first thing that I said was, it's very interesting and very troubling to me that when I look around, given the nature of the conversation, there are no African American parents here. And it really bothers me. The next thing is that as an African American man, I've steadily watched my heroes, the heroes of my community, get knocked off. Huey P. Newton was involved in a drug deal, so we're going to lessen him. But when the discussion turns to like the legacy of a white man, excuse me, but it's woodwork. People come out of the woodwork to defend this ideal, and I don't know that that's any more than what's going on, the ideal or the association of this. This man is, let me just use again another analogy that I use within our group, which is, if there were a person that were complicit in the Jewish Holocaust, I think there would be much more of an outcry, and it wouldn't even be a consideration. This is part of the Holocaust of my people, and this man was an instrument within that Holocaust, so I think that that deserves the same sort of respect. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Jefferson.
Yes.
Catherine Betts. My initial reaction to the name change thing was, before I started to talk to people, was it's, why change it? Teach to it. Teach, bring out the good and the bad, because that's part of history. We're all good, we're all bad. But having talked to people, I now understand more of the feeling, and I've certainly been educated more about Jefferson. But I really hope that we can all come together, even if the name isn't changed, and we can teach it and bring out both sides.
Anybody over here? Or I was already in this group, but Mark has been come back. Anybody in this group?
Rob Browning. I'm sorry that we didn't hear more about Jefferson's efforts to deal substantively with the crime of slavery. Jefferson himself was in fact very ambivalent on the subject and struggled throughout his life to effect practicable forms of emancipation. He wasn't able to achieve that. He was born into a slave society, and as a young man in the Virginia legislature, introduced legislation to emancipate the slaves. It failed. He wrote into the Declaration of Independence the emancipation of slaves. That was excised by his colleagues in the Continental Congress, and so on. There are numerous instances throughout his career. I think we need to honor the powerful feelings of people whose ancestors were slaves. It's a hideous legacy. But I think it's very important to try to achieve some clear sense of who this man was. And I'm afraid we didn't get much of it tonight.
I'm Lorraine Sandoval, and I have a couple of kids here. I guess I tried to take the time and try to find the best books I could, Pulitzer Prize-winning books and National Book Award to figure out. I knew what I felt, but to see something maybe contrary to what I felt. And my initial feeling was that this guy owned slaves. We have a community of African American children, white children of all different colors here, and we love the diversity of Jefferson, and to honor the diversity of our community, I don't think we could keep this name. So the more that I investigated the man, the more that I found out that he was great with architecture. He had a lot to do with the architecture of our country. Great, name a building dedicated to architecture after him. I don't have any problem with that. But when it comes to something that is for the children of this community, and this community honors diversity, I think we really can't honor the man. And I've seen it in various places. I'm Native American on my tribe. I tried to get people to vote during the election at my reservation, and they felt completely distant from this country. And I think the reason could be because words are put down on paper by our leaders, but deeds are very different from the words oftentimes. And I think that we see it maybe not beginning it with him, but that was one of the instances where the contrast was so big. So, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start now. This group, I'm sorry. Call me if I miss you. I don't want to.
Louis Friedberg. I'm a fifth-year parent, and this is, I think, a terrific gathering. Just wanted to second what Deborah was saying. I think that it would have been helpful to have gotten some of the material we got tonight earlier on in the process. It would have been great to have gotten Marguerite's presentation earlier. I would have informed the discussion a lot. Just one thing I think is really important, that this is kind of democracy in action, as we've heard from famous for. And I think we should really honor that process. I've heard kind of undercurrents that people vote against this, is going to create bad feelings and create divisions in the school. I think we need to honor the outcome of this. However it comes out, we're going to vote, and then we move on. And it's been as open a process as one could imagine. Everybody's voting, including the kids. And so I just hope that that's, there's not going to be, there may be hard feelings, but that shouldn't affect how we communicate and proceed as a community. And then last thing is I just haven't heard anything about what this is going to cost, what it would cost to change the name. Do we have any kind of cost estimate?
Yes.
$100?
It's a time to make it.
The cost of the process basically has to do with the removing of the sign, putting a new sign up if the new sign has to go up, and stationery. The cost for the district basically is about $1,500 for the signage. That's removing and adding a new sign. And then it's going to be about $500 or so for stationery.
Back over here, anybody in this room? Yes.
Well, I wanted to say that when I was a little girl, we were in church, we sang, "No man is an island. No man stands alone. Each man's joy is joy to me. Each man's grief is my own." And I really think that's applicable here. I really want a school in which no one feels disenfranchised. I want a school that's respectful of everyone.
Adding to the man who just spoke here, that even no matter what the outcome, that everybody can join together. But I think it's really important to integrate into our curriculum. I don't know if our school board members are still here, Dan, that they have some to play, but this is a real opportunity for learning for everybody, and I feel like that's what this is really about, and that's what I feel like has been lost. You know, we're not lost, but it hasn't been prevalent enough for the kids and for the whole community, and I would hope that we can initiate some kind of curriculum and integrate it into the whole school. I mean, Berkeley can be a leader in this and kind of teach kids and teach parents, but starting with kids, you know, about the complexity of our leaders and really talking about it in a way that's structured, that teachers can integrate. I feel like that's what it's really about, and to just, you know, move on with the name, I feel like that would almost be meaningless. You know, when either way, if it's changed or if it stays the same. I think that the real meat here and the real important issues that everybody really learns who our leaders were, with their foible, you know, with their evil, everything, including today's leaders. I mean, I would hope that we can really do that. So, that's it. Over here?
I'm Maggie, and I teach 4th and 5th grade. And I wanted to say that I think one of the things that I love most about teaching is that, to me, the kids, not just here but everywhere, represent probably the strongest representation of humanity that there is. And every day I marvel at the way that kids can learn to step out of their own place, identify with other people, and be a part of changing the world. And to me, that's what this is about. As a white person, I try and find a place to be an ally to people who I feel our country was built off of the backs of their labor, unpaid labor and slave labor. And in my classroom, obviously we had discussions about this topic. It's been a 2-year run on this, and I have been so energized by seeing kids be able to take a stand and understand what being an ally is from themselves, from their own ability to look at what oppression is as it's represented in all of our history books, whether it's pro or con, and to be able to look at their classmates and say, you know what, I see your pain and I want to do something about that. And to me, that's what social studies is about, and you know, I hope that we can carry on with that with the kids.
Back here? Anybody else in this group?
Hi, I'm Nancy Humphrey, and I just have something quick to add to what everyone's saying, which is many of you have taken words right out of my mind, so I don't know what to say much more. But one thing is, I have a 5-year-old, so she doesn't have a very evolved, you know, kind of sense of subtlety. And one thing, though, we're reading about the Underground Railroad, all brought up by this process, and I don't think there's a way to explain to a child, at least a child that young, what the pros are when slavery is in the picture. Whether the person was really for slavery or a little for slavery or couldn't get out of the system, I don't see a way to explain to her how the community decided to keep the name. And I want to be able to explain that to her in a way that will make sense. I don't want to have a hard reality about this right now. I'd rather see a positive.
Answer your question about the source, another source of information. The 3-hour program that Burns did on Jefferson is available for free at the Berkeley Public Library. I thought it gives a lot of his highlights and definitely criticizes him. From my point of view, democracy is a work in progress, and give it back to the government at some point. So that's the kind of controversy and complicated individual we have here. But I think that's why I want to keep the name of Jefferson, because I do want to keep the battle going for democracy, and I think he's at the center of it.
My name's Maurice. I have a daughter in kindergarten and another daughter in King. And I hope this doesn't personalize it too much, but we moved out here a few years ago from New York. I mentioned this to our group, and it was really shocking. It's a pretty diverse community in New York, and it was very shocking to move to Berkeley and see how segregated the community is here, really black and white, and economically as well, I guess. But when our kids started public school here, it was like a breath of fresh air, because it was the only place in Berkeley where we really felt the diversity of this community. And it is incredibly diverse, although it's incredibly segregated when you leave the school. And so that's what I'm reminded of in this debate, that this is a diverse community, and we don't talk about it, we don't seem to address it a whole lot, at least in my 3 years here. It hasn't come up very much, except for in this discussion, really. And I think it's an important opportunity as a parent that honors this diversity and thinks it's important in the way that we bring up our kids, that we change the name. Jefferson is not the kind of statement you want to make if you're honoring the diversity of the community. And that's not, I think I agree with your point. I mean, Jefferson did a lot of amazing things. I practice constitutional law in my work, and I know a little bit about what he's done, but it's not the right statement for the community. And my frustration with the process is that whatever comes out of here, I hope that it's also an opportunity to embrace that as well. Both the discussion around Jefferson and what it means for the kids, but if it's going to be Sequoia, then this school should be a lot about the environment and talking about trees and incorporating that in the curriculum. That it's not just a placard and $1,500 that you put up, on the wall. It's something that's more about creating a community around those issues.
Are you in which group? You're in the same group? I'll be back.
Thank you. My name is Clifford Fred. I've lived in the neighborhood a few blocks away for 30 years. Well, I graduated from the University of Virginia, which was founded by Thomas Jefferson, so I have always felt an affinity to him and have seen him as an icon. And I know it's terrible that the legacy of slavery and the fact that he was a slaveholder is terrible, and it's quite a stain on his reputation, but we can't ignore the tremendous accomplishments that he made. He had on his grave written that he was the author of the Declaration of Independence, the founder of the University of Virginia, and the author of the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom. If it wasn't for the Declaration of Independence, we may not still have the freedoms that we have today after 5 years of Mr. Bush, 8 years of Mr. Reagan, and 5.5 years of Nixon. If it wasn't for Jefferson, we may have moved much more toward being a Christian nation. Jefferson was a deist. He was not a Christian. He believed in religious freedom. He saw things in different religions that he admired, but he definitely did not want this to be a Christian nation or a nation with one particular official religion. And if Jefferson did not have the presence of mind to have made the Louisiana Purchase 200 years ago, we wouldn't be in the United States here today. I think it would be a terrible thing to take the name away after all these years, and I think it sends the message that we can delegitimize much of America's history, and I hope we can keep the name of Jefferson School.
My name is Barbara. I think it's important, I've heard a few times about that, at least if we have the name of Jefferson, we've kind of got this talking point. And I think it's really important to remember that the school name is not a talking point. It rarely ever would be a talking point. And it's an honor. And we ought to really decide who it is we want to.
Thank you, facilitator. It's kind of interesting. I approached this issue with kind of a curmudgeonly attitude. I find myself very impatient with the issue. I'll explain that in a minute, but I've got to say, this is really an interesting discussion. And now I'm going to say all those mealy-mouthed things about thank you, everybody, and it was so good to hear everybody. It's very interesting and very healthy, I think. Now, my reservations about all this. I live in South Berkeley, and the first school that my son went to in kindergarten was Malcolm X, which used to be named Lincoln. And so I experienced a school community for about a year with its good parts and bad parts, and I've got to say, I didn't feel it meant a whole hell of a lot 10 or 20 years after the name change for the state of race relations, community building, what was happening in the classroom. It didn't seem a lot different from what I see everywhere else. The really hard stuff was really hard. It didn't seem to, I don't know what it means. I guess it means something because it's a symbol, you know, and there are all those monuments in DC, and there's a federal government. It's all based on these guys a few hundred years ago. So I know it means something on a symbolic level, but when you get down to what was happening in the classroom, I didn't see what it meant. I mean, I'm very impressed by Malcolm X. I've listened to his speeches and read several of his books and all that kind of stuff. It just didn't seem to mean a lot in the school. So that's a little perspective, from the ground.
Anybody else in this little part of the room?
A couple of things. One is, I guess some of the things that I'm hearing tonight is if we're changing the name of the school, that means that we're not going to hear the good parts about Jefferson. And I just want to say that I don't think anybody in this room is saying we should study Jefferson. I am sure my daughter is going to study Jefferson in her schooling, and she should. He's an important figure. But we're talking about honoring someone. And so what makes me think about is, and this is what I shared in my group, is the composer Wagner. I'm a musician, and Wagner is arguably one of the greatest opera composers ever. He wrote The Ring, and it's just an incredible masterpiece. And I think people should absolutely go to the opera and hear his composition. But he was an incredible anti-Semite. He was like, the Nazis loved him. He wrote so strongly about anti-Semitism. So if I think about if my daughter went to a music school and it was named after Wagner, I would really have a hard time with that. And it does not mean that we don't honor the good parts of him. So I just really want to make that point. I don't think anybody's saying don't honor the good parts of Jefferson, but it's very different to have him be the person that we are honoring as the name of our school.
I'm a fourth grade teacher here. One of the great educators of today, a woman named Deborah Meyer, talks about the habits of the mind. And one of the 5 habits of the mind, in other words, ways of learning to be a good thinker, she talks about understanding point of view and whose shoes you're standing in. And for me, I hope that we will change the name. It's about not who is so right or wrong, or who did something good or bad. Everybody is full of contradictions. But it's about whose point of view, whose shoes you want to see history through, whose point of view you want to put forward that isn't usually put forward. And as such, I've chosen to try to see history through the point of view of those people who've been oppressed, who are not usually represented, because it's their voice that doesn't get heard. And I really know this because the other day I was reading the little book about Jefferson that the staff put together, and which I thought was a very balanced view. It told the good things that Jefferson did, and it also mentioned some of the issues of slavery. And as I was reading it, I I felt fear because I realized I was breaking a taboo. There was something in me as I was reading the parts I know and that I believe need to be shared in the community about the slaves, that he owned slavery. I still felt like I was breaking a taboo. And those are the taboos, those myths that I think we need to break if we're going to begin to see history from not just the point of view of people who had power, who've had the resources to get their story through, but to begin to see history from other people's point of view as well. And I think this process is part of that illumination, that being willing to take that risk to say, let's choose about whose shoes we're seeing history from, and just be conscious of that.
Anybody over here? Yes?
Hi, my name is John Squire, second grader here. And I'm feeling pretty conflicted now, actually. And as our moderator did a great job said at the beginning, we should all try to keep an open mind. So I've tried to do that, so I've learned some things here tonight. Like, I came here with a little piece of paper with why we should argue to keep the name of Jefferson, and I think maybe we should, or I'm not so sure. I think one thing to keep in mind, as a few people have alluded to, is diversity and disenfranchisement, and that, in my mind, the one thing that is important that we should strive for at the school is inclusiveness and closing what's called an achievement gap, which is apparent at the school as in many other schools, referring specifically to the difference in achievement between African Americans and non-African Americans. And I don't know if changing the name of school, as one person said over there, may not have any effect in the classroom. Others have said maybe it will, and I don't know if we take many polls here, but I think perhaps if it does close that gap just a tiny little bit, maybe it's worth doing that even. I was going to come here and talk about the 100-year history of Jefferson School, and that would not be there anymore. Although whether the great things that Jefferson did were outweighed by his some very bad things that he did. It's just been very illuminating for me, and thank you all for your viewpoint.
As a young man, I was active in the civil rights movement, as a lot of people my age were. And as I look around, I see only a few people who are of that age. At the end of the civil rights movement, there was a feeling among some of us, particularly middle-class white children, that we won a great victory, and now we could go back and get our degrees and go on with our lives. And we did. Unencumbered by any of the residual effects of racism that was still being felt in the country. I'm sure that Civil War soldiers from the North, after they had defeated the Confederacy, came home and figured the battle was won, and now restoration could take its effect, and everything was going to be great. The problem is that we live in probably one of the most racist societies in the world today. And you only become sensitive to that, or particularly become sensitive to that, when you were the object of the racism. That's, if I'm not the object of the racism, if I'm not every day encountering that problem in my life, and sometimes almost an insurmountable problem, then I can forget it exists. I can go on with my life. But for much of our country, that's not true. I was looking at a baseball game the other day, and it was between some club and the Cleveland Indians. Now, I don't know if you know that the mascot of the Cleveland Indians is the caricature of an American Indian. And it's a horrid caricature. It would be the same as if they had a team called the Cleveland Black People, and you had a caricature of a black person eating a watermelon. It's that bad. but we don't notice it, we're not sensitive to it unless we happen to be a Native American. It exists, and if you think that black children in this society don't feel every single day that oppression, then you're simply mistaken. And we've got to deal with not just slavery, but with the effects of slavery that we're feeling today.
My job today was to talk about the history of Thomas Jefferson. So that's what I did in my speech. But what I feel more keenly is that this is a community. Miriam talked about her experiences of collecting petitions and how she went up to African Americans. No question. Slaveholder, of course I'm signing it. That's their pain. That's their grief. It isn't transient, as Thomas Jefferson, I didn't get to finish his notes on Virginia, but the thing that struck me most in all of them, their grief is transient. And I am really frightened that too many of us still believe that the grief of African Americans is transient. I am I'm biracial. I was raised by a white mother and a black father. I was raised by a wonderful white woman who did something very frightening and married a black man and raised black children. But my father, when I got a driver's license, I mostly had white friends. I was the only one who was taught what to do when you are stopped by the police. Because that's the reality that my father knew I would face. And we don't have very many black parents out here. School isn't a place where African Americans traditionally feel welcome. And many of them signed the petition anyway. Many of them said it won't do any good, but they signed it anyway. They don't believe that you will change the name of this school. They're the minority. You are the majority. The minority has come to you and said, do you care about our feelings? Should we just heal whether the name is changed or not? Well, it's easy to heal if it's not your pain, isn't it? It's easy to heal if you were heard. My hands are shaking. I've taken a beating in the press for saying something out loud. I heard somebody say, oh, we white people are afraid to talk because we're going to be called racists. I've been afraid to talk.
I'm going to take three more people, three more comments if anybody has.
Hi, I'm Jan Goodman, former principal of Jefferson School. And one of the things I felt worst about when I left Jefferson School was that the name was still the same. And what I went on to do after that was teach American history at King. And I think that when I look at the name Jefferson, I think about what do kids think schools are named after? They're either named after places or important people, important heroes. That's what kids know about the names of schools. And if you put someone if you honor a person, a flawed person, whatever he did, that was wonderful. And I know there were many things he did. It is totally, to me, outweighed by the fact that he felt it was okay to own human beings and at the same time author a document that said all men, and I say men, are created equal. And for him to benefit and get elected president years in a row because of the 3/5 compromise, which counted African people as 3/5 of a person. They couldn't vote. 3 out of 5 couldn't vote, which is what my 8th graders thought. But they were 3/5 of a person, which gave the South enough votes to sustain slavery for years and years and years beyond when it should have been sustained at all. So to me, it's like, wait a minute. To me, it's like you can have 50,000 things in his good column and that one thing in his not good column, and that's enough to not name a school. He's not a hero. He is a flawed man who had some good ideas, but when he went home to walk the talk, he couldn't do it.
Two more people. Anybody else? Come on, don't be shy.
That's fine. Hi, my name is Adam Sanchez. I have a kindergartner here and 2 more in the pipeline, as it were. It's hard to I'm sorry. It's hard to take things out of context and think about, bring Jefferson to our time and to say, well, thank you, sir, you've done this, you've done that. But if he was here tonight, I'm sure he would say, where the hell's your gratitude? If it wasn't for me, none of you would be here today. And I would tell him, as a person of mixed race, Native American and Mexican American, that I wouldn't want the school named Custer. And Mr. Jefferson, what you did was wrong. And right is right, and wrong is wrong. And this is not about us. This is about our children. And this is a place of education and a place of learning. And we want our kids, our children, to be better than we were, or better than we are. And in so doing, education means learning the truth, learning the facts, and changing as you go along. Nothing has stayed true and true like this administration. You open your eyes and you learn, and hopefully through this education process, especially in the school of learning, you change your point of view and you embrace your community members and you feel their pain and you identify with it and you move on. As I was saying earlier, I'd love to see this many people on a PTA meeting. I would love to see everybody here to help shape an agenda to teach our children, to understand a curriculum where we can teach and talk about all these things. There are many other great and tragic figures, some as dual as Jefferson, that we could all learn from. So, thank you very much.
One more person. Time for one more. Anybody really chomping at the bit to get up here? Or not? No? You don't have to be chomping. Okay, yeah, come on. Here.
I think that this has been a great event, and obviously very well suited for adults to hear everybody. And I wish that we had had this at the outset of this first idea about changing the name. For me, it's been about process. It hasn't been about the name. And when it comes down to it at the very end, I hope that everybody, when I came to the school because of the people and the teachers and the parents, and feeling like I was going to have a great community to surround me and surround my children and teach them well. So for me, it's been an upsetting process because I haven't had that chance to be able to feel this same kind of community that I walked into around this issue. And so I can't say what's going to happen in my mind for the end, but whatever happens, I really hope that in the end, everybody can look each other in the face. Whatever this vote is, and it is a vote, one way or the other, it's going to come up. And I hope we can all look at each other and embrace each other, whether we have been for the name or we haven't been for the name. That we can hold hands together and praise each other and do the best for the children that are in the school that really can't understand this issue. And in the end, it's about our children who are sitting there, wanting to be taught, looking in the eyes of the parents, of the teachers, with great gratitude, wanting to do whatever it is that you have for them. And give them everything you can.
I'm going to close it off there, but what I would like to ask you before I say one more thing, and I'm going to have Delaney come up and talk just for a minute about next steps. And we have an evaluation I'd like you to fill out, which I'm going to start passing out now. Yeah, these are the evaluation forms, just so you can start them moving along. Pardon me? You know, I think I did bring pencils. This is a school. I mean, maybe. If you need a pencil, I might be able to find one. I think I did bring some. I want to ask you, though, before you start filling that out and before Betty makes a statement about next steps in the process, just to clarify that, I want to say again that I'm so honored to be here this evening with each of you as this community, this school community. I'm just so proud of the discussion that you just had and the things that the ways that you communicated with each other, and I want to encourage you to continue the discussion after the vote, before the vote, during the vote, after the vote too, whatever it is. Continue the discussion so that you maintain the relationships that you have here. So I want to ask it's a little bit, well, I'm going to do it anyway. I think I can get away with it with you all. I'd like to hear 3 things, just pop up and say 3 things, one person at a time. We only have time for 3, but something that you are extremely proud of, this school community. What are you just most proud of, this school community? Anybody can just say it. That parents care. Thank you. Another one.
The diversity of the school.
The diversity of the school. Thank you. One more.
The teachers are very dedicated for our children's education.
The teachers are very dedicated to children's education. I'll take a couple more. They're coming. So, yeah, back there.
So that's really is willing to go through a process like this that's very comfortable for children.
That the community is willing, did you say?
Willing to go through an uncomfortable process.
To go through, the community is willing to go through an uncomfortable process like this. Yeah. Something else you're proud of. Yes.
That we're really kind of leading the country in this stuff. Because
Yep.
everybody outside of this area is really just crazy.
Yep. But let's.
That way anyway,
That you are leading the country in this process, yes, you definitely are. So I commend you and I thank you for the opportunity again. Yes? Let's, her leadership, Betty Delaney, would you come up here a little bit? I want to actually do a little more for her because if we could give her some appreciation. I didn't tell you I was going to do this. This is 2 appreciations for her, something that you really feel just that she has given this community. Anybody can say it. Go ahead. Talk to her. Wow. Yes. Thank you. Over here.
she always attends the PTA meeting.
Talk to her.
Takes part in it, and we really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Betty.
This school is a wonderful place to be. We talk about a group of people, adults, teachers, parents, whatever. What we have in common is our love and our dedication to the children. And I think that's what's going to keep us together. We've gone through a very, very long process, and we're about to come to the close of this process. You are going to be receiving a ballot one last time in which you will vote between the Sequoia or Jefferson. The ballot again will be either dropped in the office or mailed to the office, and we're going to have a date of the 26th. They will go out tomorrow, hopefully. They're in the process of being made. If you have been here, for me it wasn't necessarily, we had difficulties as I talked to people about having our children vote and become part of this process. And as I watched them vote and different things, it was amazing. Despite their age, there were different levels of understanding, but they have all gained an understanding what democracy is about. And that's a good thing for children. This will continue next year, no matter what the name is. And what we heard here, what we will continue is making sure we're a community, making sure that children understand what it is that we're about and their part in this process. So my wish is that we continue to talk, we vote, and we be a family.
Thank you, everybody. You can leave your evaluations right up here on this chair, this blue chair.